So as we come back together, again, thank you so much for sharing your concerns and your stories with me during the lunch time. It affirms the need for this intentional time to have this conversation. Because you still want to keep talking about it even when we break. So I know there is a hunger for this conversation to happen. So it's important that we ground everything theologically in Scripture, and this is simply a story that I choose to use. There are other stories that you may want to use. My biblical knowledge is probably in the elementary terms, certainly compared to yours as biblical scholars, so many of you. So if it sounds a little elementary, it's because it is a little elementary, perhaps. But it teaches, it works for me. We're talking about power, we're talking about vulnerability. If you were exposed to the Bible at an early age, or images of the Bible within the Bible at an early age, this is a story that you may have been exposed to very early in life. A popular one of David and Goliath. And so this is when we meet David as a young boy in the confrontation with Goliath. And then we see him grow and become the young shepherd. He becomes a friend of Jonathan. He soon becomes king and is victorious in battles. His reign seems secure and popular over his people. He's very established and settled in the luxury and plenitude of the palace. And my interpretation of all of that is that things are sweet for David. He has grown, and we've watched him grow into this person that people are very fond of in a positive way. And then his gaze falls upon Bathsheba. And the next part of that ends with a question mark. Is this the beginning of the shift for David? Or were there other red flags for those of you that know this story and his life much, much better than I do? Were there other red flags? Anybody want to just share just real quickly? He did not go to war as he was expected to do. Mm-hmm. He broke away from his first wife. Almost all tend to agree there were some red flags prior to the gaze falling upon Bathsheba. And I, for one, have to wonder if that was the first time he had ever looked. But it's the first time that we know that he acted upon the gaze. And he sent for Bathsheba. And so a lot of people sometimes will say to me, well, she had a choice. She didn't have to go. But I'm going to say to you I could tell you some more things that get said too. We won't go there either. But I'll tell you right now that if you are sitting on that side of the room and your bishop stands up over here and looks at you and makes contact with you and goes, chances are really, really, really good you're going to walk out of this room and meet the bishop out in the hallway here. And so we know that you know, when the king sends for you, you go. Let me tell you what I like about using this in this training. I think it is a story that shows us well how the exact same person takes the power that they have and moves through life using that power well and getting them to the place where they are sitting pretty. They are recognized as a model preacher, a model clergy person. They are doing well. And they have used their power well. And that exact same person turns around and misuses and abuses that power. And let me tell you what almost always are two of the responses to that. The first one, no way. No way that person did that. Somebody is just out to get them. There is no way. That person is the best storyteller from the pulpit and they're not that person. That's one response. The other response, which troubles me the most, is that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. So what I hear in that is that there are people who were aware of some red flags and chose to be that silent bystander. Chose to be that silent bystander. I would predict that there is a large number of us in this room who have been a silent bystander. And we have rationalized that in a way that encourages us to continue to do that. I hope today you will hear me say this, and I hope every one of you will hear me when I say this. The worst thing you can do is say nothing. So I fly a lot, and I tend to fly Southwest, and I'm standing there in the jetway the other day in Chicago waiting to fly down to San Antonio, and I've stood in that jetway many, many times, and those posters that are framed along the way, I'm sure it has been there forever. I just had never seen it until the other day. And I'm standing there and I turn around and I look at it and it says, if you see something, say something. If you see something, say something. And I guess I used to say this when I did training for public school teachers around suspected child abuse. I would rather be in the position of apologizing because I erred on the side of protection than finding out that something really bad happened and I had done nothing, when I had that suspicion that something might be not okay. And so who are the Nathans among us? Because I'm going to tell you something, people, this feels risky at times. And I want to remind you what the statement that your Council of Bishops joined with us and said 2 weeks ago. We encourage and support people coming forward with this information. And to our ability, we will do the best we can in response, including listening well to your story. And so This scripture to me helps us see ourselves in the best of light and ourselves in the worst of light. And woe is us who thinks we're immune from something like this happening. So, to get you going again here, so you're not getting too comfortable in those comfortable chairs after that great meal, I'd like for you to be in your little group again, and I would like for you to give some discussion and attention to this question or these questions. What will your response be if you see or hear a colleague violating a boundary with someone? How will you hold one another accountable to integrity in ministry? So just take a few minutes and have some discussion about that. So I am curious and interested and always learn from this, and that is no pressure, it genuinely is not. But if anyone would be willing to share anything that came up from your group, I for one sure would love to hear it, and I'm certain it could be of help to one another here.
I had the pleasure of, well, if you want to call it a pleasure, of turning in a very close relative that was abusing children in my household. And what saved the one child that was getting it the worst was after it was all, the smoke was cleared and everything, we got a hug and she said, "You believed me." Mm-hmm. "You believed me." And mm-hmm. She said, "That's my first step of healing." Mm-hmm. And then through my career as a pastor in the communities in which I served, I was able to serve as a volunteer EMT firefighter. And I would tell people when they would come to talk, I said, "You got to know this, that by law, you say anything to me that involves hurting a child, I have to turn you in." Mm-hmm. And I've lived by that rule all my life. Mm-hmm. That I'm like you when it comes to, if I have to apologize or pay a lawsuit because right. I defamed somebody, that's okay. Right. But if I've saved a child from all that, it's worth it.
Right. Thank you. And I'm grateful that you were where you were at that time in those children's lives.
I think we go back to self-care. If you have a spiritual director, you have a counselor, you have a accountability group, you have some other professional people, I'm going to guess that if you really stumble across some sexual misconduct by others, it's going to be a subtlety to it. Is this bad? Is it not? At least with a counselor, spiritual director, you have a place to go to share your observations, to get some feedback, mm-hmm. and then also maybe some ideas and help of how to move forward in a constructive and not destructive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. Surrounding yourself with some supportive people in your life so that you're not having to hold all of this all alone, that you can check it out with those people you trust.
One of the problems is we confuse John Wesley's words, and his words were, "The world is my parish," and too often we think our parish is our world.
Well, that might preach, huh? Yeah. Okay, I still want to hear an answer to what your response is going to be if you see or hear a colleague violating a boundary.
As a teacher, I was under orders to report anything. And I want men especially to realize that females often have that butterfly, that gut feeling, and they can't prove anything, and nobody will listen to them. And it works.
Well, we may finish out today on this one slide here. We're
My
not.
response would be is to tell them, hey, listen, I think you need to back up and you need to look at this situation a little bit better. And if you want to continue down this road, then I think you and I need to go talk to somebody that is a little bit, with a little bit more power than myself, and you need to hold yourself accountable because you're about to destroy everything you've worked for.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yes. Oh, okay.
I've been in ministry for 30 years in 2 districts. There was a youth pastor that was going before the Board of Ordained Ministry that came in and just quit the process. Was hired by another United Methodist Church, but not under appointment. That was brought up on and acted on because of very, very serious sexual misconduct charges, which turned out to be 2 counts of rape in this Illinois Great Rivers. One of the most hurtful and hard times in my ministry. We went through the channels, what you're saying, and what you might help us understand. My wife and I both went to him while he was still appointed because he was going out by himself with youth groups, girls and boys, by himself. And we pulled him aside and tried to minister to him. He ended up coming in within the next 2 months and stopping the process. And then we found out later what happened. What is the process that you would say? There might be people here seeing folks who are, you're asking us what would we do? We're Methodists. We have a way to do things. And it might be helpful to hear what you would suggest telling us what to do.
I absolutely will tell you what I would do. Yeah, I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to share some things. 'Cause always somebody comes up with something that I have not thought of. So, yes, but hold that question, Gary. I definitely will respond.
One of the things that I have done is to say, what I just saw you do makes me most uncomfortable. Can we talk about this?
Yeah,
And so that, if they'll talk, we have a conversation.
yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I've had the misfortune of serving the good fortune of serving 3 churches, but out of 2 of those 3 churches, I've had someone arrested for sexual misconduct. One a grandfather and one was a school teacher. And in both cases, what really, first of all, the offenses shocked me because, I just would like to think that doesn't happen, but I know it does, is the people who defended the accused, especially the school teacher. Well, those, those teenage girls are. Well, that's not what we do. And it just amazed me. I was just surprised by that reaction.
Thank you, Matt. Oh my goodness, that reaction is, you can just write that down, that you're going to hear those opposite polar reactions to this, whether it is within the walls of the church as a layperson or a clergy person, or whether it's someone outside the church in a community setting. We don't want to believe that people will do this, that, as I said about Bishop Stanowski's piece that she wrote, these people are in our care, whether they are children in this classroom or grandfathers and grandmothers or whatever. We just don't want to believe it, and yet it happens. Okay, I promise. Okay, let's do like 3 more real quickly. Y'all are all pointing. Is this who you're pointing to? Okay. I need help.
Well, personally, one of the things, my response would be to confront.
Would be what?
To confront.
Confront.
Hopefully in a gentle manner, but sometimes gentleness is not my forte. As a supervisor, under the authority of an employer, as a chaplain, I am mandated to report to HR anything that I would become aware of if any of my employees crossed the boundary. I mean,
Yeah.
no questions asked. If
Yeah.
it got any further, and
Right.
it'd be my head.
Right, right. Thank you, thank you. Okay, y'all are, you're killing me. This is peer pressure. They're pointing, and so I'm going, even though these people have had their hands up forever. over
I
here.
just want to share a story. When I first started in ministry, I was working with youth, and one of the things that I told the youth and their parents, I got them together, I said, for me, is not to be alone with any youth whatsoever. There needs to be another adult with, because that kind of stuff can bring accusations. And then there was a person that followed me after I stepped down. Later on, I get a phone call from this clergy telling me what happened, because the guy that kind of followed me after I stepped down was thrown in jail because of sexual misconduct with a youth that was like 12 or 13 years old. And my heart just sank.
Oh, yeah, of
So
course.
it's,
Of course.
we have to
Yeah,
be guarded. And
Right.
and I don't think he didn't address that with the parents or anything like that. He didn't really follow the footsteps that I
that you
took.
had. Yeah,
So, and
Yeah.
he was married, and it destroyed his family, his marriage, and
of course.
all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Bobby. Bobby? Yep. Yeah, thank you. Okay, yes.
First of all, I saw a colleague acting inappropriately, and I wasn't sure I was seeing what I was seeing. After we left, it was at a dinner. After we left, I asked my wife, "Did you see what I thought I saw?" It shocked me, so I didn't say anything at the time. It shocked me. But the thing about with our colleagues that I wonder if you could address is, sometimes there's a culture within clergy, like within the police department. You know, we have each other's back, don't be a traitor. And how do you break that culture? So it's two parts. Sometimes it happens so fast, it's like, did I see that right?
Right,
I'd hate to think I saw something and I didn't
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
And then how do you address that culture about, oh, you know, we're all brothers and sisters, covenant together,
Yeah.
and, you know,
Yeah.
kind of a subtext under that is don't rat on each other.
Okay, so let me respond now. First of all, again, I want to reiterate, I think the worst thing you can do is do nothing, say nothing. And none of us want to do this work, and yet we all have to do this work. It's not only the police, it's every other profession. And when we set ourselves up to police our own, sometimes the challenge feels very risky. And it's not uncommon, and I'm sure your bishop can speak to this as well, and many of you as well. You know, the person that is being accused, the person that we've seen and heard doing something, is the person that we were in seminary with. They're the person that was our mentor at one time or something. So the connections run deep, and they're there. And so it's not an either or. And you have a responsibility to do this right. And people are in your care, in the settings that you are appointed and working within. And again, you are the moral agents, and the burden of safety and responsibility falls to you. And there can be a gentleness to holding people accountable and holding people accountable. It's not one or the other. There can be both. There can be both, where you say, this is what I saw, this is what I heard, this is not okay, this will not be tolerated, and this is who this information has to go to if it's a reportable offense. I think oftentimes some of the situations that we hear and see are things that can be dealt with right then. And they won't result, perhaps, in a formal complaint being filed. And people have to believe they're going to be dealt with. I said this at the Council of Bishops meeting in November. The research is crystal clear. If I were to go through this room and say, if you saw one of your colleagues or someone within your place of work saying or doing XYZ, and XYZ is some type of sexual misconduct behavior, would you say something? And probably almost everyone in this room, if it was just a random me walking up and saying, if you heard or saw this, would you say something? Probably most of us in this room would say, absolutely. Absolutely, I will. And then we get in that situation, and it happens, and we're sitting there going, did she just say that? Or did he just do that? And we talk ourselves out of saying something, or it happens in an environment where we know nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants you to come forward and share this. And so what the research shows today is that people are more likely to step up and say something when they hear or see something if they know that the powers that be have said, absolutely, come tell me. Come tell me. Because of the risk, and especially, I was on a conference call coming down here, whatever day I drove down here, and one of the persons on the conference call said, when we hang up, can I call you back? I want to talk to you about something. And it was a clergy person, and the clergy person called me back. And so we have this lengthy conversation, and the clergy person says, I know I need to go forward. And I know it's appointment time. And I am terrified because the person I'm going forward to talk to my bishop about is a DS. And I have to consider what this may mean for me in my appointment if I do this. But I know for sure what I have experienced. There is no doubt in my mind, and not just one occasion. So your bishop is sitting in this room right now hearing me say every bit of this. You will be more likely to come forward, I hope, knowing that so far he has not stood up and said, you need to nip this in the bud back. you need to cut this short because you're going over into another lane that you don't need to be into. And he's still not, even when I just said that. So I am choosing to believe that when the Council of Bishops issued that statement, they meant what they put in that. As a matter of fact, the Council of Bishops came back to me and said, we have to name this a sin in this statement. And it hadn't been named a sin in this statement. So that has got to be in there. We have got to have in there our general rules of do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. That has got to be in this statement. I mean, so the bishops were serious about what they wanted in this statement. And so I am just choosing to believe that it's a statement of us saying to one another, let's hold one another accountable to do what we say we will do. Because the reality is we say we will respond in a way that holds people accountable and offers pastoral care, healing, when a complaint is filed. That's what we say we'll do. I say that to people on the phone all the time. Hold the church accountable to do what it says it will do. That's what we say we'll do. But when a person comes into your office and says, Pastor, I need to talk. I need to tell you about what I have experienced time after time again. Not just one time, time after time again. And that person has their spouse with them in that minister's office. And the spouse says, I heard it. Heard the last situation with my own ears. Walked in the church. We sit down in the pew. We look at each other and say, that's not really what just happened, is it? And it was what had just really happened. And to have that pastor say to that person in that office, that's just Jim. He's been like that forever. Everybody knows he talks to people like that. Or that's just Sue. She kisses everybody on the mouth every time she sees them. And you just got to deal with that. Is not the right answer. That's not the right answer. Because let me tell you what happens when that is the response. Then they go home, they write out the formal complaint and they sign it and they send it to the bishop. And then the issues start within that local church. He said, she said, blah, yeah, all of that kind of stuff that goes on. And so you're in a position oftentimes where you're going to get this information first. Just as no clergy person wakes up one morning and says to themselves, I think I'll go violate a boundary and commit sexual misconduct and destroy my family and at least one other family and cause trauma for the congregation that I serve and risk losing my credentials. That's not the way it happens. Also, the way it happens is not a person wakes up in the morning and says, I think I am going to go make up a story about Douglas or Cindy, and I'm going to make it about as gruesome as I can think of, horrendous stuff, and I'm going to put it in a formal complaint and send it to the bishop's office so I can enter into this chaotic process and be emotionally drained and not have a clue really what's going to happen as a result of having done this. And that's just not the way it happens. And so I said this to the bishops, I say it to you. Just be willing to hear these stories. You don't have to agree with them, but be open to hearing them and receiving them and holding them in a sacred place. Because I'm going to tell you something, and what I'm about to say, and I didn't say this yesterday because it didn't pop up in my head, but it has popped up now, so I'm going to say it. And this is not about me when I say this, okay? I want to make sure you hear me. This is not about me. This is about the behavior. Probably 90% of the time when I hang up a call in my office, and that call can be from a bishop, it can be from a DS, it can be from a person named as counsel for the church, it can be from an alleged victim who's a layperson in the community, it can be from an alleged victim who is a clergy person in the community. I would say honestly, easily, 90% of the time when that phone gets hung up, what I hear is, I know you heard me. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for letting me have a place to talk this out. And all I did was just create that space over a telephone line. I didn't say, now, are you sure? Now, I'm going to tell you, this is going to be a mess, perhaps, so I don't know if I would go forward with this or not. That's not the stuff I say. I say, it sounds like you have reason to be concerned based on what you've shared with me. I want to make sure you know what the options are for what you can do with this information. First of all, as an alleged victim, I want to ask you, are you aware there is a policy in your church that addresses sexual misconduct, including what to do if you believe you are a victim of sexual misconduct? To this day, unanimously, the answer to that question is no. I had no idea. So put your policy on your charge conference agenda. Just go on and do it so that you know you're going to cover this at your next charge conference. We man the sexual ethics website. And there is, I have a pretty colored one somewhere. Let me find it. Here it is. And on that website, if you go to it, this flyer is right at the front of it. You can download this flyer and make it personal. It can be Illinois Great River, it can be Trinity UMC, it can be First UMC Springfield, it can be whatever you want it to be. Again, my challenge to you is to do that. Put it somewhere where it can be seen and not just in the women's bathrooms. Yeah, you'll see it at the end. But I can tell it to you right now. It's www.umsexualethics.org. But I mean, this names, we say, we know it represents an exploitation of power and it's a betrayal of sacred trust. You may have experienced sexual misconduct if, and it lists. If you believe you have experienced sexual misconduct, and it lists. If you want to report sexual misconduct, here's what you do. In the Rio, Texas conference, and I honestly have not looked at your most recent policy. I know it's in your flyer. And so you may have this as well in your policy. In the Rio, Texas policy, there is a phone number that you call depending on who it is that you are filing a complaint or concern about. If it's your local minister, this is who you call. If it is a lay person, this is who you call. If it is a district superintendent, this is who you call. If it is a bishop, this is who you call. And to me, that says, what I interpret in that is, we want to hear this. We want to hear this. We're going to make this user-friendly for you. We're not going to make you have to dig around and try to find it. We're not going to do that. Whew, I got worked up about that. I don't know how I got off on all of that, but I did. That's as far as I can bend.
Doesn't this make you proud to be a Methodist?
Yeah. 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 You know, I'll share, Bishop Beard, what actually, if the truth be known, my home conference bishop said at the Council of Bishops meeting in November. And I appreciated Bishop Swanson not recognizing me. He did not name my name. What he said was not about me. But what he stood and said among his colleagues was, in the times we are in right now in the life of the church, we need to recognize that as a church, we're doing some things right. And we provide some resources where other denominations never dream of providing resources. We have response teams called into Episcopal churches because the Episcopal churches have no idea what needs to be done in that particular area following the admission of sexual misconduct by a priest. And we have leaders in this field, ecumenical leaders in this field. Some of you may have heard of Marie Fortune and Faith Trust Institute. And I have the utmost respect for her ministry of 40 plus years. She has been teaching this when nobody else was teaching it. But if you look at Marie Fortune's materials, she references the United Methodist Church in some of it. So thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think we are saying, in response to everything that is happening, we are really serious about getting this right. Next slide, please. I just heard the gentleness in my voice when I said, next slide, please. So I would just sum up this whole piece around power as saying, this is the simple graphic of it. With power comes greater resources, and with greater resources comes the potential for helping or hurting. And with vulnerability comes fewer resources and the potential for being helped or for being hurt. So it's important for you as clergy to know what your limits are. When I was in private practice, I had a lot of young clergy straight out of seminary who would choose to take advantage of their employee assistance benefit and set up an appointment and come see me free of charge, which you have that benefit. And as of yesterday, I would go on record as saying you have one of the best benefits I have ever heard of. You get a lot of free appointments in your EAP appointment benefit, your EAP benefit. So use it. But those new ministers would come in, you know, straight out of seminary, scholars, really high grade point averages, and sit down in my office and say, I don't have all the answers to everything. And I feel like I should have. Because I'm being invited by the leadership and my congregation to have all the answers to everything. And so I'm finding myself not doing a good job of saying, that's not what I'm good at. Because I'm scared that that's going to mean they're not going to like me. And I really like my appointment and I'd like to stay there another year, and I'm scared if I say that's not what I'm good at, they're going to say, we need more than you. And my heart would break when I would hear that, quite honestly. And then we would move to work toward what they could do to take care of themselves in that situation. I don't think it's limited to just young clergy. I think it's a challenge for you on a regular basis, depending on where you are and who you are in ministry with. So know what the limits of your abilities are, and I just use this one as an example, to provide counseling. And know how to communicate these limits. This is about boundaries. That's all this slide is about, is setting a healthy boundary. How are you letting your congregation know what you are good at and what you don't need to go over in that lane and do? But that you can find someone. You can work together as a community of faith and make sure everything is covered that needs to be covered. But this is when you get in over your head, because they're saying, we don't want to go to a therapist. We want you to be our marriage counselor. And our last minister did this. And you're sitting there going, oh my goodness. And these are movers and shakers in the congregation. And I really need to say, okay, even though I don't have a clue how to begin in marriage counseling with them for a long-term basis. So I just ask that question and encourage you to think about that. As a former staff parish chair, I loved it when that new minister and that new minister's spouse would come for that evening meeting following the announcement of the appointment. In that time, we called it a covenant meeting. I'm not sure what you call it now. But it was that transitional meeting where the new clergy person and the clergy person's spouse, if there was a spouse, would come and meet with staff parish. And you always had those staff parish members that were going to say, well, now what we want you to do is this, 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 and this. And what we got to have here is this, 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 and this has got to be our priorities. And anyway, I loved it when that pastor would walk into that meeting and say, this is what I know that I am not qualified to do. And they would say, and this is an issue that I made a commitment to some time ago, and I now serve on the board of directors, and it involves 2 hours every third Thursday, and I will be out of the office for the afternoon of the third Thursday of every month if you support this. So that nobody was left guessing. This wasn't something that needed to be addressed later when somebody called and the administrative assistant said, oh, well, she's not here today. Or they left at noon and are gone to Memphis to a meeting or whatever, and you didn't know about it. So just love that when a minister was able to walk in and say, this is what I can do and I can do well. These are areas that I don't pretend to have expertise training. I don't know what the number is here in Illinois Great River, but I heard Bishop Schnese say the other day in Rio, Texas, he stood up before his group and he said, the truth of the matter is there's no more than a half a dozen people in the entire Rio, Texas conference who are clergy, who are qualified with training and license to do any type of counseling beyond 2 or 3 times. So know your resources and refer out. You just don't have to be everything to everyone all the time. Though as lay people, we're going to invite you to be everything to everyone all the time. So just to follow up on that, know your limits, know what you do well. It's not necessary to exaggerate your abilities. It's just, you just don't have to do that. You just don't have to do that. I mean, honestly, I stand here and I think about going back to your homes and putting some of this in place, and how possibly you may feel some relief of heaviness and burden to shoulder everything. So be careful about getting in over your head. It's not necessary. Communicate your limitations well and clearly. And that leads to this next piece. It's interesting in ministry, as opposed to so many other professions, that oftentimes what I hear is that expectations of clergy are oftentimes unspoken. And I don't know if you've had that experience or not. I know the discipline very clearly says what your expectations as clergy are. And within the life of the ministry setting you're in, sometimes there seems to be a lot of unspoken expectations. And that may not be the case for you. And if it's not, I would say you've got some good people that are in your leadership positions with committees, or you've just gotten lucky, I guess, or something. But for some of you, you may be able to relate to that. And when expectations are unspoken, there's always a blurriness around what I'm supposed to do. And some of you have named some of it today. Well, because the former pastor did that, we expect you to do that. We didn't know we had to say that. We just thought you knew that you were expected to do that. So taking care of yourself in your position and having some clear job descriptions. I remember when my church decided we were going to hire an associate minister. Well, goodness gracious, we had all kinds of conversation about that. Everybody was excited. We knew we needed it. It was just going to be the best thing that happened to us in a long time. And we did. And well into that person's appointment, guess what we realized? We had never written a job description. There was not a job description. And so then that just opened up another challenge, to say the least. So what are your responsibilities? How are they getting communicated to you? How are you understanding what your responsibilities are? I'll just be silent during that one. Yes. Who gives you assignments? You know, oftentimes it's not uncommon when I'm talking about power to hear a clergy person say, I don't have any power. And I've heard my clergy say that. I don't have power. You have power. Or the 450 people that are sitting in here every Sunday have power. I don't have any power. They tell me what to do. Well, I understand that's the way it felt. And to some degree, it's accurate. They are. Everybody's telling you what to do. And so that's why that question is there. Who in terms of the chain of command, who gives you assignments? How well is that understood? How clear is that? Again, in the name of creating a healthy atmosphere for you to be in the position you're in. Yes.
First of all, I was a clinical counselor before I became a pastor. When I became a pastor, I was their pastor, and I had the names in my book. I had two clinicians that I could send people to for that type of help. Marriage counseling, simple counseling, things like that I did. But I never did anything beyond that. I was always grateful for my DS, and I always felt that I could go to the DS with anything, or even take them to the DS. But I never tried to go beyond being their pastor. So when I sent them, they always came back. I was their pastor. I prayed for them. We kept Christ in their hearts all that time. But that was my job. And I let the counselor, clinician, do their job. I think that's very important for pastors to know. And that's the response. That's part of that responsibility.
And, thank you so much, Margaret. And that, for some people to have permission from a minister, from a pastor, from a clergy person, to have permission to go reach out for help with a trained professional clinical person is the first time they have ever let themselves get that. I've worked in a battered women's shelter for quite some time through Catholic Charities. I can tell you I would go in one day a week and do therapy and walk in and have an appointment with Mary, and Mary's new, and Mary's jaw is wired together because it's been broken by her spouse, and she has 3 children there who have all been physically abused, and sit down with Mary and spend an hour or so, set up the next appointment, and return the next week and say, oh, well, I've got a 2 o'clock appointment with Mary. Mary left a day after you were here. Went back. Mary's gone back. Well, it was just a matter of time before Mary came back. And to have a minister say, a clergy person say to Mary, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to take this, was the permission that I would have never been able to give as a layperson, as a clinician. But to hear that from clergy, so you've got knowledge, wisdom, and power, and keep it in your lane as a clergy person and impart it. Give it to them. Say the things that you have the opportunity to say. And then leave the rest of that stuff up to other professionals. Okay. I think that's what you were saying, isn't it, Margaret? Okay.
I think the conundrum for pastors is that we have a discipline, and I actually just turned to it, that actually outlines.
Do you mind talking just a little bit louder?
I said the conundrum for pastors is that we have a discipline, and I just went to it.
Yes.
It outlines our job description.
Yes.
So it is pretty in-depth.
Yes.
Some things are not. Actually, it's paragraph 340. I just turned to it. And so I think it's about how do we exercise the discretion of how we do the job that we have, because it's in a discipline, and we're held to that. So I wonder how you understand that too, and how to help us to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is in there. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think I said that. I may not have. I know it was in my head to say that absolutely your responsibilities are spelled out in the book of discipline, and as a result of that, oftentimes the specific expectations are not talked openly about. There's a lot of expectations that are never discussed. And clergy find themselves, I think, sometimes in very challenging positions within the life of a congregation because that attention was not given to those responsibilities that are spelled out very clearly in the discipline. Yeah, paragraph 340. Yeah.
One of the things I do at every meeting of our church board, I finish my report by asking these two questions. Are there things I'm doing that I need to cease? Are there things I'm leaving undone that I need to start doing?
Excellent. 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 Thank you, John. So these three issues I would encourage you to keep in your forefront. You have power. It's inherent in your role. You just simply have it. How you use it is your free will choice. And every one of us in this room get to decide that. You will be adored. I have a first cousin that called me the other day to tell me how an elderly aunt of mine on the other side of my family was doing because she had just seen her at church on Sunday. And I'm thinking, what? You live on the Gulf Coast, and she lives in north central Mississippi. I said, what? How did you see her at church? And she said, well, our pastor was appointed to a new church. And we are sick about it. And so Bruce and I drive one Sunday a month, 4 hours. And I thought silently, and this is why I have a job. So you will be adored. You will be adored. You know how that works. You know how that feels. I have an elderly aunt, not that one, but one more, that is like a mother to me. And she could not be happier to tell me, and she lives in a retirement home in Nashville. And there is a former Methodist bishop, well, a Methodist bishop, a retired Methodist bishop, who lives in that retirement community. So she can hardly wait to tell me that. And she can hardly wait to tell me that she has decided, Becky, this is the first woman I have ever had as a minister, and I think she's going to do okay. You know, and just, she is so happy to be able to relay that news to me regularly. And you know, if Carol does okay, Carol has a friend for life, and she will elevate Carol on a pedestal that is so high that if Carol were to ever do anything that disappointed her or that she didn't approve of, the fall is really, really big. And so that's what happens when there's adoration. You're going to have them who will adore you. You're going to have them who will follow you anywhere you go. Don't let them. It's not good for you, and it's not good for them. And then you have fiduciary responsibility. And because of the unequal power that exists between you and the people you care for, you are required to always act in a way that is in the best interest of the people that you serve. So you've heard me use the word boundary violation all day today. There is a difference in boundary crossing and boundary violation. I believe that the mere call into ministry, not that that's mere, but the call into ministry asks you to cross boundaries. Both of my parents have died following extended illnesses over the past 20 some odd years. I cannot tell you how many times we have had a room full of ministers in the hospital room or sitting in the intensive care waiting room, none of whom we had called, but someone had called on our behalf. And they were former ministers, they were current ministers, they were my dad's minister when my mom was in the hospital, they were my minister. I'll never forget looking up and seeing a brand new minister who had been at my church for 2 weeks walk into my dad's hospital room in a neighboring city 85 miles away. And I went, "What are you doing here?" And I was serving as lay leader at that time. And my dad was on his deathbed. And he said, when they told me at work this morning that your dad was on his deathbed, I knew I needed to be here for you. I was very grateful he was there, but I didn't call him. And when he walked in that room, he very clearly crossed a boundary and came into my space. But what did he not do? He did not cause harm to me. He did not cross that boundary to meet his own needs. He crossed that boundary to meet my needs. And I had the potential of being helped or hurt. And I was helped. And so I think my interpretation, and I own that and name that, my interpretation of a whole lot of Jesus' ministry involved crossing some boundaries. The longest recorded conversation in the Bible between Jesus and another person is what? Samaritan woman at the well. Well, we don't have to spend much time talking about the fact that that was not supposed to be taking place in that time. But there was not harm caused. Boundary violations occur when the boundary crossed is not in the best interest of the person you are asked to care for, to serve. So a pivotal question in this is that you're always asking yourself, the issue of what I'm about to do, park this car at the hospital, or go into this hospice setting, or whatever. The issue is for what purpose and in whose interest. That is the hair-splitting piece here. The purpose, what is the purpose that you are doing what you are doing, and whose interest is being considered in this decision to do this? I don't know if any of you have read any of Brené Brown's work. She has written, yes, several of you have. She has written quite a number of books. She has some phenomenal TED Talks. If you have never listened to her TED Talk around vulnerability and shame, I highly recommend you put that on your list of priorities. Her husband is a minister. As a matter of fact, he is the minister of a new church plant in Austin, Texas, which just what? B as in Becky, B-R-E-N-E. And her last name is Brown. And she's actually a researcher in the social work department at the University of Houston. But her, you know what I love about Brené's work is there's so much common sense. I mean, it is just a good head on her shoulders. So it's not a lot of psychological jargon. It's not difficult at all to follow her TED Talks. She just gave a sermon like 2 weeks ago, and I would really recommend you consider listening to it. I listened to it the other night at home. It was a sermon, and I think the title of it is What I Like About Church. And she gave it at the National Cathedral in D.C. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago that she did this. And you know, she starts out talking about how nervous she is standing up there, and you're thinking, really now, come on. But she talks about what she loves about being in church. And I'm just sitting there going, yes, yes, me too, that's it, that's it, that's it. As crazy as it can feel sometimes, and sometimes I just want to go, you know, I just am done with it all and walk away or whatever, but I keep staying and I keep going because that's why, because of some of the stuff that she says. But treat yourself, and it may not feel like any help. You may not like it at all, so ditch it if that's the case, for sure. But I have gleaned a lot from her work. This slide is from her newest book, and the title of it is called Braving the Wilderness. And so what you will see spelled out on the left-hand side of this slide will be the word braving. And this is just a piece of just to give you a glimpse of some of the stuff. But it's so appropriate to what we're talking about today. So for the B, she asked herself, did I respect my own boundaries? Was I clear about what's okay and what's not okay? Well, let me tell you something. That does not just get delivered to you on a silver platter. You have to figure out what's okay and what's not okay. And in order to figure that out, you have to listen to your heart. You have to get still. You have to get quiet. You have to do the work of knowing yourself. And so many of us don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. I don't know if any of you have read the old book. Now, somebody told me at lunch when I was talking about it, it was probably my new friend, told me at lunch that I had just given away my age, so I'm going to give it away again. Actually, I'll tell you, I'm 60, almost 61, and proud of it. But a book that was so popular so many years ago, and it was Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. Remember that book? I love that book. I love that book. It's packed up somewhere. But one of my favorite lines of all the lines in that book is Scott Peck says, "It never ceases to amaze me the extent to which human beings will go to avoid pain." And he says that statement in reference to doing that inward journey, of doing the work to get to know yourself. You know, oftentimes a person would show up for the first 2 therapy appointments. I don't know, for those of you who are therapists in here, if you ever had this happen or not, and then you wouldn't see them again. Because it began to get a little warm in the kitchen. And they got a little uncomfortable, and there may have been a little bit of a nudge of a challenge of touching something that was extremely uncomfortable for them to touch. And so we all have those places. Every one of us have those places. And yet the reality is, wow. When we look back at the times when we've grown and learned the most, almost always it's following painful, difficult, challenging times. But that fear of going there can paralyze us. It can keep us from moving forward. So be clear. Know what is okay and what's not okay. Know what's okay. I had one of your colleagues come up to me at lunch and say, you know, I wasn't even aware of the patterns I was setting early on in ministry. But what I can tell you right now is I don't recall leaving a church event to go to a family event. But I can tell you a lot of times I left family events to go to church events. And the awareness of that pattern was not there. So thank you for sharing that today. Remember what I said early on today? How will you practice that self-awareness all the time? Not just once every 4 years, but all the time. What just happened to me? What did I just feel? What did my gut say? Most of us have somewhere in our bodies that react. I can tell you right now, I store a lot of stuff right there, right in that spot right there. And if I will get still and be aware, sometimes I'm sitting in my seat at my desk and my shoulders are up like this, and I'm not even aware that I've done it. Or how many times I've said, oh, that was so gut-wrenching for me. And so it's not a surprise that I live with an autoimmune disease that is completely and 100% totally related to my gut. So our bodies scream out at us so often. We need to be practicing awareness where we are able to say, time out, time out. That's not okay. That's not okay. And the R for her is, was I reliable? Did I do what I said I was going to do? Go ahead. A, did I hold myself accountable? V, did I respect the vault and share appropriately? And for her, the vault is that confidential information that has been shared with you. And of course, when it comes to reporting abuse or neglect, that is something that you are mandated to do. And one of you, I think, shared a beautiful example of how you do that. Did I act from my own place of integrity? I say to alleged victims who call into our office, it's not uncommon to hear me say to them, I want you to think about what your next steps are going to be, and I want to encourage you to pay attention to if those next steps are honoring yourself from a place of integrity and deep respect for you. Don't let anybody take that from you. That's yours. And so act in a way that honors your own integrity. N, did I ask for what I needed and was I non-judgmental about needing help? That's when I need to sit down and somebody else stand up here and talk. Man, I can be so judgmental toward myself when I need help. I was told I came into this world a little independent spirit. And so I had parents who allowed that and didn't try to squelch that. Well, that has served me well in a lot of capacities and not so well in some. And so I have to do the work to know myself well enough to know it's okay for me to ask for help. It is okay for me to ask for what I need and not judge myself negatively in doing that. And G, was I generous toward myself? Or did I deprive myself in what just happened? So when we talk about setting our boundaries, you know, sometimes I hear myself saying, if I were to put this stuff on TV tonight, nobody would believe it. If I were to put on TV what I heard, nobody would believe that's what I heard. Nobody would believe that lay leader was whispering to the music director at the time of receiving communion how sexy her voice sounded this morning. You just wouldn't believe it. And yet, I'm telling you, I am not making this stuff up. I am not making this stuff up. So how would my actions be perceived if they were made public? So that you just stop and ask yourself that. If we were to go out in public today and we were to announce what I just did, whatever it was I just did, how would that be perceived? How might that be perceived? And if there is a question about how that would be perceived, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's not necessary. Okay, calm down. And then there's that. How might my behavior be misperceived? We all have, you know, we have all said things and people have heard it completely different than what we had meant for them to hear. We have made some gesture or sat in a certain way in a chair and somebody come up afterwards and say, well, you know, the least you could have done was acted like you wanted to be here. And the reality was I was so excited about being there, but obviously my body language had been completely misperceived or something I said was completely misperceived. So that's just my responsibility to ask myself that. And you know when you've been in an interaction with somebody and you turn around and you walk off and you're thinking, ooh, I don't know if that came out the way I wanted that to come out. Or their reaction makes me think they didn't really hear what I wanted them to hear. Or their reaction to what I just did is pretty evident that they were not impressed and they did not find that funny. And that they maybe were even offended by what I did. So you know how that feels. You know what I'm talking about. So it's your responsibility to turn around and go back and check that out. I just walked away from this and your response has me thinking whatever. That's my responsibility to do that. Okay. Whose needs are being met when I am interacting, when I'm doing whatever it is? You know, when you allow the church to be your all-inclusive, 100% life, then the reality is you're looking to people in your church to fulfill your needs. That's just the simple truth. The need to be needed, the need to be recognized, the need to be comforted, the need to be able to be dependent upon someone, the need to be in an intimate relationship with someone, all of those needs. If the church is 100% your life and you don't have a life outside the church, you are turning to the people that you are to be caring for to get those needs met. So simply asking yourself, gently, doing this gently with yourself. All right, now whose needs are getting met right here? Whose needs are getting met? I've agreed to meet with this person because I love all the wonderful things he or she says about me when we get together. And I need that today. I need to hear some of those affirmations today. So that'll be good to have that on my calendar today. Next one. Am I attempting to have my own personal needs met through this action? Next. How does my supervisor and or colleagues respond when I honestly report my behavior? So again, where you are checking in regarding your accountability with that person who is serving as your accountability partner or within your covenant group that you are meeting with regularly. And if you don't have one of those in your life, I want to strongly encourage you to make that a priority. Don't go listen to Brene Brown before you do that. Get that set in your life. Who is that person or those people who are going to help hold you accountable in ministry? In life for that reason. My uncle was a high school football coach in a small town, and he apparently was really good. And so when he died, quite a number of the former football players from the early 60s came to speak at his service. And one of the guys was there, and Alex was probably, 60 years old at that time. And he's standing there talking about my uncle, and he says, I'll tell you right now, if I had a cigarette in my mouth as a grown adult and I saw Coach coming down the sidewalk, I threw that cigarette down right then. Because I didn't want him to see me smoking, because I knew it was not something he wanted any of his players to ever do. And it still influenced me as a grown adult. Who is that person in your life that helps hold you accountable for how you do life? Next slide, please. So just to shift gears real quickly, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I want you to think about this. This is an interesting question in the life of the church. How will you handle it if a church member offers you a substantial gift, such as a car, use of vacation home, large amount of money? And how would you respond to that so as to maintain an appropriate ministerial relationship? And some of you have stories, I know. Some of you have stories. One of your retired elderly colleagues yesterday, I had so much fun with him. He raises his hand, I take the microphone to him, and he says, I've been in ministry 72 years. And when someone offers you a gift, take it. It was pretty funny. It was pretty funny. But then he said, but be aware of the strings that are often attached. Be aware of the strings that are often attached. And here's what I wanted you to hear me say. I know that there are strings attached to offering plates as well. It's not just substantial gifts. It's that person who follows me out to the car as staff parish chair, and I've got my hand on my car door handle, and I know he's right behind me, and he makes sure everybody knows he gives more money than anybody else to this church budget. And he's standing behind me, and he says, if you don't get rid of him, I'm leaving. And I turned around and said, and I don't know where this came from. It's the only time I've ever said what I probably should have said. And I turn around and just simply say, well, you may have to leave. Now, that was 15 years ago, and he's still there. Okay? But you know, I know there are strings attached, not just to substantial gifts. But this is about boundaries. And you need to be aware. You need to have a response to this. I don't know if your annual conference has any type of a policy regarding gift giving, if that is something you talk about openly among yourself as colleagues. If it's over a certain amount of money, do you say, no, you need to contribute that into the offering plate, and it can go into the pastor's discretionary fund, or it can whatever. But I'm telling you, I've heard stories from your colleagues across the United States that have blown my mind. From, you know, season tickets to big time NFL, you know, and you know if you're going to get appointed to that church, you're going to get that, and you know you're expected to take that because the person who's giving it to you is going to be highly offended if you don't take it. Or the minister who arrives and is given a car because a handful of people are embarrassed by the car or truck that the minister's driving. And then gives them clothes because they don't think they're dressing well. So this happens all the time. This happens all the time. And there's something unique about this in ministry, that you don't hear this in some of the other professions. But you have people sitting in your pews that have a lot of resources, and they get a lot of personal needs met. Oftentimes very unhealthy by buying you, so to speak. Okay. So we could spend the next day talking about social media. You have a handout, you have a flyer in your, I don't think I have it in my packet here, but you have a flyer in your packet that is for just some guidance for social media. If your local church or workplace where you are does not have a policy on the use of social media, you need to have one. You need to have one. How is social media used on church computers? What gets posted? Who gets friended? What happens when you get appointed to another church? Do those social media friends go with you? And what are the potential boundary issues in that? How are you staying actively involved in the life of that former appointment via social media when that is not what you are supposed to be doing? And the boundary issues around transitioning from one appointment to the next are oftentimes huge. Huge. And you as members of the Illinois Great River Conference need to do the work in helping establish some really good boundaries. I actually have a copy. I don't know if I sent it to you or not, Jan, when I sent you some stuff. But if not, I'm happy to send it to you. I have a copy of a really good covenant where the outgoing minister, the incoming minister, the staff parish chair, and the DS all sign off on it, saying this is what we agree to as this transition happens. And it is everything from the current pastor stands in the pulpit and says out loud, effective next Sunday, I am no longer your minister. I am no longer your minister. And it goes on and names a lot of other stuff. So I can get that to you if that's something that you would be interested. Again, it's sort of like when I would tell my daughter when she was a teenager, no way you ever drink or drive, no way you ever ride with someone who's drinking. And I could say that all day long, but I'm going to tell you, when I wrote that on a sheet of paper and drew signature lines, it took on a different level of seriousness in our home. And that was a good thing. So what do you see as the potential boundary issues? And then go ahead, next one. That's my new sign. That means go to the next one. And so what does your online presence through social networking, blogs, etc., how does that reflect your role as a minister professionally? If you're not going to say it in the pulpit, don't post it. Just don't do it. And seriously, what is your policy within your local church? I've been involved in situations where administrative assistants have walked into offices of pastors, and there it is, right there on the screen, saturated in pornography. And just, oh my gosh, what do I do with this information? And so this needs to be openly addressed in a policy. What do we do about that? Because, you know, the issue of pornography and the internet has presented an entirely new world for us when we talk about boundaries. A lot of people believe that if they can do that privately, then they're not hurting anyone. And a lot of people forget what church property is. And that includes a parsonage if you're still in a parsonage. That includes any equipment. That just needs to be openly discussed. So what are you doing through social networking that's reflecting who you are professionally as a minister? So this is an old quote from Emerson: what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. So what does it take to be healthy in ministry? And the simple answer to that is get a life. Who are your role models for life? Physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. Remember the question about vision? You can't have a vision if you don't have an idea of what it might look like. I can't fantasize about a cruise unless I have a little bit of an idea of what that might look like. And so I've talked to people who have done it. I've seen pictures of people who have, pictures from people who have been on cruises, and it looks like might be a fun thing to do. So who are the people in your world, physically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually, that you can say, I like how they're doing it. They don't deprive themselves of dessert 365 days out of the year, but they don't have a diet saturated in sugar. They don't run 15 miles every day, but they recognize the importance of movement, physical movement in their life. They are people who have looked life in the eye emotionally. They've had peaks and they've had valleys, and they haven't run from them. They've confronted them. They've looked them in the eye. They've leaned into life, and they've done it well. And who is it that walks the walk and doesn't just talk the talk? Who is it that tends to their life spiritually in a way that is a model for you? And get yourself a plan of how you're going to live your life in these areas. One of my favorite questions in the world is, what can you lose track of time doing because it brings you joy? I just love that question, because the answer to that question is the answer to my next favorite question, which is, when does my soul hum? When does my soul hum? It's oftentimes when I'm doing whatever it is that I can lose track of time doing because it brings me joy. Know the answer to that question. It's always so sad when I would ask someone in a therapy session, what do you like to do for fun? And there's just a blank stare. I have no idea. I lost touch with that part of me a long time ago. Well, I want to tell you something, and you can go do the research yourself. I won't bore you in that. But I'm going to tell you something. The research is out there, and it's been out there for years. Play is crucial to well-being in life. And so figure out what it is that you enjoy doing. Okay. Find colleagues for study and support. And if you're in a rural area or even an urban area, consider inviting people from other denominations. I'll go on record and say to you, if you're going to reach out and find a spiritual director, I highly recommend you find a spiritual director outside the Methodist Church. Outside the Methodist Church. And any directees that I have ever worked with have been non-Methodist people. I think that is so important. Okay? So how do you plan to balance your needs for a social life with the needs of the congregation or other ministry to which you are appointed? You also have another handout in your packet, and it is titled A Self-Care Inventory. Do you have that? It's simply a jumping off place. You could sit down with a pen and pencil paper right now, and every one of you in this room could come up with 20 more items to put on that. So just use it as that. Just use it as a beginning place to ask yourself some questions that will move you in a direction, hopefully, of having better balance in your life. Another great book that I have recently read is called Forged, F-O-R-G-E-D, Forged in Crisis. The Power of Courageous Leadership in Turbulent Times. It's written by Nancy Cohen. She's a historian at the Harvard Business School. And let me just tell you real quickly about this book, and I highly recommend it to you as a leader, which every one of you are in this room. She spotlights 5 masters of crisis. And what I love as a therapist about it is that she does research on all 5 of their lives from childhood forward. And so you get to read about this person, and you get to know about who they grew up with and who influenced them and what day in and day out life was like for them as a child, as a teen, as a young adult. So it's a beautiful picture of these 5 people. And I want to tell you who the 5 people are. The first one is Ernest Shackleton, the polar explorer who was marooned on an Antarctic ice floe. The second one is President Abraham Lincoln, on the verge of seeing the Union collapse. The third is escaped slave and legendary abolitionist Frederick Douglass. The fourth is Nazi-resisting clergyman Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was agonizing over how to counter absolute evil with faith. And the fifth was Rachel Carson, an environmental crusader who was racing against the cancer ravaging her in a bid to save the planet. And so this is what Nancy says in essence. These are the 3 points that I took away from this book. Number 1, leaders are not born, they are made. And every one of us in this room have what it takes to lead courageously inside us. Each of these 5 people had an amazing ability to guide others toward doing good. Each of these 5 people had an amazing ability to guide others toward doing good. And the final one is that in addition to doing good and modeling virtue, all 5 of these had a stern commitment to self-improvement. And so they were constantly challenging themselves to grow. They were constantly knowing that there was room for improvement in their life. So be careful about getting stagnant. Be careful about getting lazy. and feeling like you've reached it. You haven't. You haven't. Next slide, please. Do what? Forged in crisis. Forged in crisis, the power of courageous leadership in turbulent times. And so again, I ask you to consider a person you know who demonstrates character, wholeness, and integrity in his or her life. And what do you believe contributes to helping this person achieve this life? Because again, it helps us to have a vision, to have an image of what this might look like that we may be hopefully moving toward. Who is that humble person of faith that you know? And for most of us, that person's face immediately pops in your mind when I say that. Who is that humble person of faith? And I smile when I think about who it is. And then I ask myself, what contributed to that? And what was it that I would see in that person? And I see in that person a person very grounded in doing good for the purpose of doing good. Not for the purpose of recognition, not for the purpose of ego building, for the purpose of doing good. Next slide, please. So I hope that you will go forth at this time and be willing to identify the pressures that ministry places upon you. I need to reword that because it's not can place, it is places upon you. Know when what the pressure times are for you in ministry. Is it Advent? Is it Lent? Is it Holy Week? Is it funerals? Is it weddings? Is it hospice visit? Is it year-end budget reports? Is it crunching numbers? Is it charge conference? Is it finance committee? Is it all the committees at your church that want to meet on Sunday afternoon or every night during the week? You know, what is it that is it's some unique pressures for you? And what I want to encourage you to do is to simply be able to name them for yourself and build in some cushion for yourself during those times. It's like that shock absorber. There's not a question. You're going to drive through some rough road from time to time. And it is very beneficial for the ride and for the well-being of the vehicle to have some good shock absorbers when you do that. The same is true with this. Have some good cushion. Know what that cushion is. Know what it is. If it's an extra day or afternoon or hour, or if it's lunch outside, what is it that you can do that builds some cushion in for you? Know where your self-improvement can be identified and made happen. And have a plan. We write out grocery lists. We write out menus for the week, especially when there are children at home. We do all sorts of things in the name of planning. And very few of us ever sit down and write out a plan for our own self-care. And again, I'll remind you of my friend who has his new home, and he's so excited about his new tree. And he's planting it in a place where it has the potential to grow to its full potential. So what will your plan of self-care say that supports you growing into your fullest potential? And these are those three questions again. You can go ahead and put all three of them up. So I think I said they'll be our bookends today. There'll be what we begin with thinking about, and there'll be what we go home thinking about. What is my vision for me in terms of being the best pastor that I can be? What's getting in the way, and what can I do in the name of setting some good boundaries to help this vision get lived out? Okay. This is a question that simply serves me, and so I share it with you for no other reason. For no other reason. In the name of self-awareness, this has been a question that's been helpful for me. Does this nurture me, or does this deplete me? And Jen mentioned my schedule, and my schedule is in ink until the week of Thanksgiving. And a lot of people go, I don't know how you are doing this, but let me tell you something. This nurtures me. I get energy from you. I get so excited to be amongst ministers and talk about how you can be the best minister that you can be. That just gives me lots of good energy and nurtures me, and so it does not deplete me. It does not deplete me. Now, I'm going to work from home Friday, so I don't have to trudge through the snow that somebody told me is blowing in Thursday and Friday in Chicago. But I'm going to build that in. I've already decided what I'm cooking Friday night. I made that decision before I ever left home. So I know what I'm going to be cooking, and I love to be in my kitchen, and that nurtures me. So it can be as simple as that. That may sound very simple and trivia to you, but that doesn't cost a lot of money for me. But it gives me what I need at this point in the week. Okay. This is the homepage of the umsexualethics.org website. I hope you will visit it regularly. If you have any suggestions for it, you feel free to let us know. For the purpose of time, I think we want to wrap up. I think I'm out of time. So thank you for the chance to be here today. I'd like to leave you with the words from another person I've read so much and just have such respect for his work, John O'Donohue. And John O'Donohue wrote a lot in the field of Celtic Christianity. He was a clergy person. His first book was entitled Anam Cara, which means soul friend, and he felt very strongly that every person needed that friend who knew their soul and who walked alongside them through life. He died entirely too soon, about 5 years ago, suddenly. I believe he was in his early 50s. His last book written was called Bless the Space Between Us, and it's a book of blessings. And if you can think of a situation, there is a blessing in that book to address it. And this is one of them. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read it with you and ask that you simply take it with you and consider it as you go forward in your most important calling as clergy and lay people. So the title of this blessing is A Blessing for One Who Holds Power. May the gift of leadership awaken in you as a vocation, keep you mindful of the providence that calls you to serve. As high over the mountains the eagle spreads its wings, may your perspective be larger than the view from the foothills. When the way is flat and dull in times of gray endurance, may your imagination continue to evoke horizons. When thirst burns in times of drought, May you be blessed to find the wells. May you have the wisdom to read time clearly and know when the seed of change will flourish. In your heart, may there be a sanctuary for the stillness where clarity is born. May your work be infused with passion and creativity and have the wisdom to balance compassion and challenge. May your soul find the graciousness to rise above the fester of small mediocrities. May your power never become a shell wherein your heart would silently atrophy. May you welcome your own vulnerability as the ground where healing and truth join. And may integrity of soul be your first ideal, the source that will guide and bless your work. Okay. Thank you.